swatantriya. It's the exuberance of being, which will just like when you are so fulfilled, you will kind of, chalak jana jaise, na? Chalkega, na wo. Agamas coming from the mouth of Shiva, going into the ears of Shakti. Supreme consciousness is the foundation on which everything emerges and dissolves. Emerges and dissolves. We are Shiva. But Maya has worked on Shiva and has made individual beings by layering them with the limitations. Ma kinchit tyaj, do not renounce anything. Ma grihan, do not assimilate anything. Viramo swastha, get established in repose in your own self. Yatha avastita, in whichever state you are, because you are basically Shiva state. So Tantric Shaivism is dependent on initiation. So Diksha is the foremost requisite. The word Tantra comes from Tanu Vistare, the Sanskrit verb root Tanu Vistare. Vistare means expansion. So that literally means that which expands. Tantras are a line of scriptures coming to us from ancient times, and they were supposed to be the revealed scriptures. They were orally transmitted, consolidated by Acharya Abhinav Gupta to Tantra Lok. There is a saying that you can be initiated Gurutaha, Shastrataha, Swataha. Like you can be initiated by the Guru, by the scripture, study of the scripture, and sometimes on your own. Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, for example, gives 112 techniques of experiencing that supreme consciousness. In the crowd of your thoughts, take up one singular thought: I am Shiva, Shivoham, and this entire world is my Aishwarya.
Hello, Alka ji. Welcome to the podcast.
Namaste, Deepak. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. And so, Alka ji, this is a new session for me also because most of the guests we have had till now have not been from the Trika Philosophy. So it would be a good one, a new session. Before we jump into it, a quick introduction from your side, Alka ji, who you are and what your own journey has been till this point.
Deepak, see, professionally, I'm an English professor, and my academic credentials are in the public space. But on this platform, I would like to tell you about my spiritual journey, rather. So, my Diksha is from Mantra Diksha is from Satyananda tradition of Bihar School of Yoga fame. I was initiated by Swami Niranjanananda Saraswati and also Swami Satyasangananda Saraswati, whom we call Swami Satsangi with love. She's the Peethadhishwari of Rikhya Peeth, one of the branches of the BSY, Bihar School of Yoga. Then I was initiated also into Sri Vidya by Professor R. Satnarayan of Mysuru. He's not in the physical body now. 3 years ago, he left his body. So he initiated me into Sri Vidya, and, the entire, for many years, the practices he gave me. After that, the journey took me to Kashmir Shaivism, and this was completely by chance that while I was working in 2002 on my doctoral thesis, which was on Akka Mahadevi and Andal. So Akka Mahadevi is a Lingayat. She's a Veer Shaivite. So these are the people who composed vachanas, and I worked on her compositions, which are a direct address to Shiva. So she calls Shiva O Chenna Mallika Arjuna, and has a direct conversation about her spiritual experiences, about her experiences as a woman. So that was quite fascinating, and this was still a part of the Puranic Shaiva tradition. But while working on Shaivism, I hit upon a book, and that was, I think, during that period, 2002 to 2006, in Rishikesh, on a bookshop near the Ganges, which unfortunately is now closed, that old bookshop. So there I found a text called Shiva Sutras. So it was more of the, the Shiva Sutras, the title, I thought it has something to do with Shiva, and there was a picture on it. So of Acharya Abhinav Gupta, surrounded by the yoginis and, with his sitar. or Veena, I think. So that was very fascinating, and I picked it up, and that changed my life and my conception about Shaivism. Being this god sitting on the Mahadeva mountain with matted locks and an entity. So this then it was an ocean that kind of opened for me after Shiva Sutras. Then I found the teachers also. So my Trika Guruji is Professor Mark Tixkovsky. His spiritual name is Markandeyanatha, and we are from the lineage of Swami Lakshmanju Maharaj. So he was the direct disciple of Swami Lakshmanju Maharaj of Srinagar, and he teaches us within that lineage. So this is the journey so far, and sadhana is of course personal, which is for everybody their own. Uh,
So, were you already initiated in Sri Vidya when you came across Kashmir Shaivism?
yeah, yeah. And when I came to Sri Vidya, I was already initiated into my mantra diksha.
Ah,
So yeah, this may appear to be very strange to people, but it is really a very logical culmination into this non-dual consciousness. Because in now what I follow, which is Trika as a philosophy, which is a non-dual philosophy, in this Sarvam Shivatmakam, everything is Shiva. So, the doors and windows that open on the journey are all leading to that luminosity of the consciousness.
perfect. I have a few other questions to ask you about your journey into Shaktism and then into Shaivism. But before we do that, Alkaji, what is Trika philosophy in a nutshell?
See, Trika is an evolute of the older ancient tantric traditions. And the tantric traditions ran parallelly to the Shruti, the Vedic tradition, what we know as Sanatan tradition. So tantrics were also the Brahmins who kind of, did not want to follow this, fourfold path through the ashramas. So they were called Ati ashramis. The four ashramas they wanted to transcend and wanted to directly experience. So the initial tantrics were ascetics, but and the scriptures that the most ancient scripture that we find is Pashupat sutras. Now there are many tantras which by the time, and they are all I mean, you may say many amnayas, many agamas. Agama and tantra are synonymous words. So by the 9th, 8th, and ninth century in Kashmir, these tantric traditions and the scriptures were consolidated by the Kashmiri masters between Acharya Somananda, Acharya Utpaladeva, then Vasugupta, and Acharya Abhinavgupta, and Kshemaraja, the entire lineage. All these were the masters, the scholars, sages, saint scholars from the land of Kashmir. So they exposited this tantric proliferation of the scriptures into a definitive philosophy, and which was called Trika. Because it developed in Kashmir, then it is popularly known as Kashmir Shaivism. But literally now, what is Trika philosophy? Because that's your question. So Trika literally means triad, which is like means a set of three, a group of three. Now, what is this three? This three is the three coordinates of existence, like the consciousness, the energy, and the creation itself. But in Trika tradition, which developed in Kashmir, if you ask a Kashmiri Pandit, they would talk about three goddesses like Para, Parapara, and Apara. Para is the supreme, then Parapara is the middle one, and Apara is the lower energy. These are the three Shaktis of Icha, Jnana, and Kriya. So, on the religious level, if you use the religious terminology, this triad has many correspondences. So, for instance, at religious level, in ancient times, it was Pati, Pashu, and Pasha, or you may say Pati, Pasha, and Pashu. And then Shiva, Shakti, and Nara,
Hmm.
that's the individual being. Then, if you want to look at it metaphysically, then it's certainly consciousness, energy, and the empirical being. That's the individual constricted consciousness. Like, empirical being could be a human being, could be a butterfly, or everything that is kind of can be measured is. So this, and then psychologically, like, from the what you perceive from the mind, if you look at it from that angle, then this trika is the perceiver, the means of perception, and the perceived.
Hmm.
So knowledge, means of knowledge, and the object of knowledge. So the and many more correspondences, and it's beautiful poetry also, these scriptures that talk about trika. So in short, this is trika. But what is wonderful about trika is that it assimilates the ancient spiritual and religious discourse or religious terminology, and also gives you a metaphysics,
Hmm.
which kind of um, gives food for your intellect, not only for your experience, your mental understanding or spiritual experience, but also for your intellect. So they have developed an impenetrable metaphysics of philosophy.
Before we move on to the philosophy, Alkaji, so you mentioned various definitions of the three coordinates, right? And on the face of it, they all look very different, right? If you look at Ichha, Jnana, Kriya, or you look at Para, Apara, Para, Para, I mean, they're very different systems. So are these different schools of thoughts, or are all of these consolidated in one single school?
They are completely correspondences. So they are not different schools. This is Trika. And if we had time and if we had space, I would be able to tell you how consciousness is Shiva,
Mm.
or how that consciousness is the perceiver, and how the energy is the Shakti, and how energy is the means of perception.
Mm.
And similarly, taking the third coordinate, the empirical being, the Nara, the individual being is the object, and it is the object, and also the object of knowledge,
Mm.
also the limited consciousness.
So they all align in
They are
some manner.
totally one. Like, it's like if you're a religious person, call it Shiva and
Mm.
Shakti, and I, like, individual. And if you are a intellectual person, consciousness, energy, and the creation, how energy, Shakti, is actually the means of creation. It is
Mm.
the Shakti, the energy that this consciousness uses in order to manifest the creation. So these are, like we say, na, Shiva uses his Shakti for doing everything. So
Right.
it's like, now I hope it's a little bit clearer.
Well, I would love for you to expound on the philosophy itself, but I just wanted to know one technical definition from you. The Agamas and the Nigamas, how do you define them, and how do they stand in terms of other Vedic terminologies?
Agama means the revealed scripture. Nigamas are the Vedas.
Mm.
Although Vedas are also supposed to be the voice of God Himself, but the Vedas are an exposition for the human life to, and they divide it, like they are very organized. So they are called nigaman. Like we do the nigaman. Nigaman means doing the organization. So they are very highly organized. For instance, the Karma Kanda is for person on the earth to find Ashwarya, wealth, Pashu, the kettle, which were the metaphor for Ashwarya, for wealth, were the Pashus, and Putra, and the son. So the metaphors have changed now, but to live a fulfilling life of sensual fulfillment, psychological fulfillment, social fulfillment, there were yagnas. So Vedas are focusing on the yagya, basically. Yagya is the karam kand aspect. It
Mhm.
was only later when the Upanishads evolved and more contemplative, like the gaze turned within, you know between Vedas and Upanishads are the Aranyakas. When the rishis started to contemplate and they started to look for the essence, then they turned within. And from this contemplative space came the, the how the outer and the inner can merge or merge, and that's what then slowly led to Vedanta, which is called the end of Vedas. But the another name for Upanishads is also Vedanta, because they come at the end of Vedas. Coming to Agamas, this word is used for specifically for the Tantras, because they are also supposed to be coming from the mouth of Shiva, going into the ears of Shakti, Parvati, because the Agamas are basically dialogic in nature. So they generally, like, Shakti, you may call her Parvati, or Devi, Bhairavi. These are again synonyms for Shakti. So Bhairavi becomes a seeker and asks the questions: how can I experience that? That supreme, and she calls it by different names. Bhairava, she calls it Paramashiva, basically supreme consciousness. How can I experience that bliss of plenitude, which is supreme consciousness? Then, so this is a dialogue. Then Shiva, or then again he's also called Bhairava, Shiva, Paramashiva, different names, and God. Shiva answers. Okay, so the dialogue, tantras are always in this dialogic form. That's they are called agamas. So coming from the agama means that which comes, So coming from the mouth of Shiva and getting into the ears of the goddess. There is a deeper, much deeper layering to this entire metaphor of a dialogue, but maybe some other time.
Some other time. So, the philosophy itself, Alkaji, how do we understand it?
The philosophy. So I will try to simplify. The philosophy is non-dual, Maha-Advayavad, like the supreme non-duality, because there is Advaita Vedanta, and we will come to that. And this is Advayavad, the supremely non-dual. So, which means that in Trika philosophy, there is only singular foundational reality, which is consciousness. So everything, you may call it supreme consciousness to begin with. So supreme consciousness or consciousness is the foundation on which everything emerges and dissolves, emerges and dissolves. So this process is satat, like unending, endless, like, emergence, dissolution, emergence, dissolution. This is the spandan we call, the spandan of creation. Samhar and Shrishti, they are happening all the time. And the analogy used is opening of the eyes and closing of the eyes. But coming back again to that thread where I began, the non-dual, singular, unified field of consciousness. Now, the word consciousness means ability to cognize. Now, cognition, the ability to cognize, and supreme consciousness has supreme ability to cognize, supreme cognition. So the attribute of consciousness is cognition. Now in this philosophy, cognition also means activity, ability to act. This is called jnana-kriya, jnana-kriya samucchay. So these two are the, you may say, the attributes, the inherent features of the consciousness: cognition and agency. Okay, so within this unified consciousness, when it begins to cognize its own self, like, to look back upon itself, then the very act of cognizing, the very act of looking, it has to objectify itself in order to look, no? Almost like a woman looking into the mirror, like the reflection in the mirror is actually an object, but she is the consciousness. She is the consciousness, but she herself is, through her consciousness, she is cognizing her own self as an object. So similarly, consider Shiva within Shiva consciousness, supreme consciousness within itself, cognizing itself by itself. It has to objectify itself. When you objectify yourself, then diversity happens. The manifest creation in its diversity manifests in the act of cognition. For instance, take that same analogy of a woman looking at herself. So when she looks at herself, she's a whole being, but her cognition will fall perhaps, on her hair, and that manifests for her at that moment. Then she looks at, say, her, say her, okay, here, the bindi, then the bindi manifests. Then she looks at her attire, the attire becomes the focus of attention, and that manifests. Are you getting me? So how the objectification happens and how it manifests the varied self of Shiva himself. The consciousness in its varied manifestation is happening, by the sheer act of being cognized. So it is the consciousness which is cognizing itself. And what does she use to cognize itself? It uses energy to cognize itself. And what is being cognized? That is creation. So on this unified field of consciousness, the entire play of cognition and that which is being cognized is happening by the cognizer.
Okay, so I'll put in some questions there.
Sure.
Firstly, when we talk of consciousness, and obviously in Trika, the attributes of consciousness are very different from those, let's say, in Advaita. Clearly, right, if you say Satchit Ananda, you say, okay, this is existence, consciousness, bliss. However you define bliss is there. But something which I think Trika brings in is some functions of Maya in Advaita, inside the domain of consciousness.
True.
Practically this agency and this, right, the reflection, the prakasha, the vimarsha, all that stuff. How would you relate the consciousness as we understand in Advaita, and even in fact in other traditions, let's say non-dual Buddhism, and in Trika, how much are they similar and where do they start differing?
So let's take up Advaita Vedanta. The similarity, I would say, is just nominal for the namesake. They both have Advaita in their philosophy, but they are completely different. Because Acharya Shankar, who was, of course, drawing from the Shruti tradition, from the Vedas, because his foundational texts are the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. So for him, as you rightly mentioned, Brahman, which is Satchit Ananda, is the true reality, Brahma Satya, and Jagat, Mithya.
Right.
The Jagat, the world, is an illusion. So now you can see there are already two elements, but doesn't matter. He says that this absolute Brahman is the only reality. So we recognize only Brahman. So that's only one element. That's why it's Advaita. But the Kashmiri Shaivite would ask him, for instance, if I have to enter into a Shastra with a Vedantin, I would ask them, like, and this is called, by the way, Vivartavad. Brahman Vivartavad. Vivartavad means apparent transformation. The apparent. This is only apparent. Vivartavad means transmutation, transformation. And they use the analogy of serpent and the rope to explain it. That, if there is actually a rope, but the perceiver is perceiving it as a serpent. So the reaction and the activity will be certainly of fear and running. So consequentially the world happens because the perception is erroneous, and the world is a result of this erroneous perception. This is one thing, just hold on there, that they call it Vivartavad, that it's a erroneous perception. Now they say that Brahman, so on one hand is this, on the other hand, Acharya Shankar says that Brahman is the cause of the world, efficient cause as well as the instrumental cause. When you say instrumental cause, that means almost like the potter using the mud to make a pot. The mud has to be there, no? And the mud will have all its elements transferring into the pot. So as soon as you say that Brahman is the instrumental cause of the creation, then That this is called karya karan bhav, by the way, the causal
Yeah.
relationship. The causal relationship, if you are ascribing causal relationship to Brahman, then Jagat will have to have its attributes and its influence, and its the material is Brahman. So, uh, so that can be questioned, no? Like, where is, if you say Jagan Mithya, Jagan is not Brahman, then why do you say that Brahman is the cause of the Jagat? Now, hold on to this also. The third thing is, he says that it is because of Maya that this erroneous perception happens. Maya and Avidya. These two terms are used synonymously in the Acharya Shankar's Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. So now hold on to this third line of argument, that Avidya and Maya are the cause of this erroneous perception. But Avidya, they say, is anirvachaniya, is cannot be explained. It is Adi Ananta. It is like Adi and Antarahita. It has no beginning, no end. So if you are bringing an element which you cannot explain, so you are bringing an element, another element. So it already becomes two. It defeats your purpose of uh, calling yourself the Advaita, the singular reality. On the other hand, if you kind of, go back to Kashmir Shaivism, where, as you yourself also mentioned, that the Maya is a Shakti there. It's not an illusion. It is out of the free will of Shiva. Let me use this religious terminology because it's easy to understand. Otherwise, I'll have to use word consciousness, consciousness, consciousness again and again. So let's say supreme consciousness. Let's call it Shiva for the ease of understanding. Now, it is Shiva's swatantriya, absolute freedom, out of which he chooses to objectify himself by using Maya Shakti, his own energy, which is called Maya Shakti. Okay. So Maya is not something out of Shiva. Maya is not something out of this supreme foundational consciousness. It is one attribute of that same consciousness. You get me? So there is a singular foundational reality in Kashmir Shaivism. Now, Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism, these two were the principal philosophies which any Kashmiri Shaivite would have to counter and encounter, because after Acharya Shankar, he was almost an avatar. We call them avatars because they are like God. These visionaries, these people who influence the whole world through their spiritual and philosophical power. So, of course, Advaita Vedanta has taken over the entire subcontinent, just as Buddhism had taken over the entire subcontinent before Advaita Vedanta, before Acharya Shankar. Acharya Shankar himself was countering Buddhist philosophy quite a lot, and you must know that he entered into Shastra thus with the Buddhists. So Buddhists, on the other hand, are they talk about perception, the act of perception, and a lot of work has gone into this theory of perception, and which is used later by Acharya Abhinav Gupta. Also, he builds up on that. In Buddhism, this anityavad, the momentary existence, that's their main philosophy. In the Anityavad, they say that every act of perception is transitory, which is conceivable, understandable. And they say that the reality that we perceive is because of the quick chain of perception. It is like many perceptions added together. It's because of the chain of perception that reality looks kind of holistic to us, but it's just it's not true reality. Now the Kashmiri Shaivite questions that. Kashmiri Shaivite says that what is the substratum on which this chain happens, linking of this chain happens, and they say it's the consciousness that is the substratum for the different perceptions. So for me personally, and I'm sure for any student of Trika philosophy, it's logically and intellectually very satisfying and also spiritually very uplifting.
So again, these are longer discussions between
Discussions.
each one of them. But just coming back to your original definition of supreme consciousness. So the supreme consciousness wants to look at itself, and for that reason, it objectifies or diversity is created. Where do the individuals like us fit into this paradigm?
Thank you for asking that question, because actually this is the vantage point every individual seeker will enter into any search and any philosophy that can satisfy. The individual here is the limited perceiver in this philosophy, limited perceiver. So going back to this supreme consciousness, it is objectifying itself. Huh? Go to that process. Now they conceive 36 levels of origination, 36 categories of tattvas. Tattvas are principles of creation. Huh? So 36 principles of creation are in a way the entire building block of the creation. Now within the creation, from Shiva up to earth, Prithvi, where does the individual come? Now, they do not distinguish between human beings and serpents and butterflies and tigers and worms. For them, we are limited perceivers, just that, empirical beings, because we have been measured by Maya. Maya, one of the meanings of Maya, it comes from the word Maya. Maya means that which measures. So Maya literally measures. Measuring means limiting. So we are being limited. The Maya is using different layers to cover us. Okay, so I have to use our vantage point. We are not into the serpent's consciousness. We do not know that. So you are asking, what are we? We are at that level where Maya has worked on us. Say that consciousness. We are Shiva, but Maya has worked on Shiva and has made individual beings by layering them with the limitations of Kala, limited creativity, Vidya, limited knowledge, Raga, limited attachment, limited liking. We cannot like everything. Kala, time becomes sequential, past, present, future, and niyati, space becomes limited for us. That unlimited consciousness, that supreme plenitude, that purna ahamta, is by the work of Maya, which is the Shakti of Shiva, is veiled into the individual consciousness. Okay, and the individual consciousness has everything which the supreme consciousness has. Like it has Kala, it has Vidya, it has Raga, it has Niyati, it has Kala, but in the limited measure. So, we are Shiva, but we are operating like Shiva. Like we also do the Panchakrityas, the fivefold act of creation, sustenance, dissolution, then, getting into Tirodhan, like, settling silently before Anugraha, before again, rising back into ready to create. So these are called fivefold acts of Shiva within the creation. We do the same, but we are limited. We cannot create everything like Shiva does, the supreme conscious. We cannot know everything. We can know little. We cannot love everything. We love this, and as soon as I say I love this, that means exclusion. I'm not able to love the rest of it. So we become limited that way. Then niyati, we cannot be all pervading. We occupy a certain time and space. Kala, we live in sequential time, chronological time. So these are, now if we are able to recognize, and that's called pratyabhigya in this darshan. It's the philosophy of recognition. So if we just recognize that, we are limited, but basically we have the capacity to experience our plenitude, our purnata, then we can we feel like Shiva.
Let me try to encapsulate in one sentence. So there is a supreme consciousness. There is a desire to know itself. Out of that desire, right, to looking itself, the example which you give, looking into a mirror and you're focusing at different aspects. Out of that desire, this limited consciousness sprouts up, which we all are.
Huh.
Okay. Is that correct till now?
Correct.
Okay. So between in these limited consciousness, which have all the attributes, but not complete attributes, like put it this way, how do different individual consciousnesses relate to each other?
So different consciousnesses, and that would include not only human beings. Different consciousnesses are connected because our substratum is that universal consciousness. So we are basically all connected. But due to our limitations, we see each as different from the other. And a beautiful analogy, which will make it easy to understand, is given in Parmat Sar of Acharya Abhinav Gupta. This is like Darpan Bimbe Yadvan Nagar Gramadi Chitram Avibhagi. Within the reflection in a mirror, just as the entire diversity of a village or a town is reflected in all its diversity, one with the mirror, different from the mirror and different from each other, although it is actually one with the mirror. You know, for example, this screen. Now, this screen is reflecting, I see at your screen, it is reflecting you and everything behind you, although you are nothing but the screen. So, similarly, although you are the screen, you are that supreme consciousness, but you are getting reflected as different not only from the screen of the consciousness, but also from the other things which are reflected on it. You are different from the mic, you are different from the painting behind you, you're different from your earphones, you're different from your this beautiful thread that you are wearing. You are different, although you are nothing but the screen. So Darpan Bimbe Yadvat Nagar Gramadi Chitram Avibhagi. Although it is Avibhagi, but it appears as with Vibhagavat.
And is this differentiation apparent illusion, or is it supposed to be taken as real?
We in Trika consider it. This is just an analogy, by the way.
Yeah.
It's just an analogy, because in this also then come qualifications, because as such mirror is different, as such, but that consciousness doesn't use anything external. In the mirror, at least the object of reflection is outside of it, but within that supreme consciousness there is nothing outside of it, because everything is emerging on its screen and falling back into its screen, emerging and falling back. But am I answering your question? You are saying that is it an illusion, or it's a reality, because it is part of that consciousness all the time. It's never losing its touch with the consciousness. It may experience itself in a limited way, but it is not losing ever. It is not out of Shiva consciousness.
There are some usual questions which all philosophies face. One of them is, why is all of this apparent, right? Veiling and unveiling happening, which I think Trika probably answers it on its own. It is saying that there is a desire to know itself, which comes. Yep.
Desire looks like a very limiting word, na? You know what they say? It's like they say it's swatantriya.
Swatat.
And then bliss, with swatantriya is related the bliss. So it's almost like, and somewhere I read long ago, it's the exuberance of being, which will just like when you are so fulfilled, you will kind of, chalak jana jaise, na? Chalkega, na wo. जब full भर जाएगा तो छलकेगा, like when you are completely full, you are bound to spill over in joy. So it's the bliss of being so full that you want to kind of know what is happening. Like I don't know if I'm using words. Words cannot define in infinity. Words cannot express. But for my own sake, I think like that state is so full, so blissful, and so exuberant that it then
It
begins to
spills over.
create.
Understood. So the second question which usually follows is, what is the objective here? Obviously, there are different objectives. You want to let go of suffering. You want to let go of illusion. You want the Brahmjnana. What is the objective in Trika? What are we working towards?
So again, you're really like asking. I can see your how from where your terminology is coming, because all the Vedic traditions and they supposedly our six systems of our philosophy, you know, they are always talking about elimination of dukkhatriya, you know, the trividha dukkha, the trividha tapa, the threefold suffering of humankind. Here, you know what is the magic of Trika philosophy? Here, because everything is Shiva, there is no need for salvation. There is no soteriology at all. So you, like, you know, Acharya Abhinav Gupta says, Ma kinchit tyaj, ma grihana, viramo swastha yatha avasthita. Which means, ma kinchit tyaj means, do not renounce anything. Ma grihan, do not assimilate or, you know, take upon anything. Viramo swastha, get established in repose in your own self, you know, repose in your own self, yatha avasthita, in whichever state you are, because you are basically Shiva state. But then comes another kind of point. So if I am Alka Tyagi, happy teaching and talking to you, happy teaching literature, coming back, doing some sadhana and contented, then I'm Shiva, because I'm in that blissful mode. But the desire will come. Desire will come because I'll feel, I'm not complete yet. Then desire will come to go a little bit step higher. You know, then I will seek. So either I'll seek outside or I'll seek within. So it depends on, you know, if you are a spiritual seeker, you will see, no, another state has to be, you know, another paradigm has to change. Or outside you will seek, then you will gain some fulfillment, you know, a bigger house, a bigger green bungalow. Then you will be happy again. Okay, that's also Shiva. So Jagat is also Shiva, inside is also Shiva here. So as long as you feel the plenitude, you are Shiva. As soon as you feel the non-plenitude, the incompleteness, then again your search becomes for another Shiva. You know, if the worm is happy in its Shivahood, it's completely Shiva. If the worm is not happy, it would like to become the butterfly. If the butterfly is not happy, it will become, you know, squirrel. Squirrel is not happy, it will become a bird. Bird is not happy, it will become human being. And human being is not happy, it will become Shiva. I mean, that realization. So they say that grahya grahak, the proportion of grahya and grahaka. Grahak means the one who जो ग्रहण करता है, like, you know, the one who takes upon, yeah, the one who absorbs, the one who assimilates is the grahaka, and grahya is the that which can be assimilated, which can be taken, you know, है ना. So it depends on the grahak, depends on the receptacle of the grahak. How much can this grahak perceive? If he can perceive the whole world is mine, I am Shiva, Shivoham, then that grahak is complete Shiva. But if the grahak is feeling, I'm Alka Tyagi, I live in this small apartment and I need to expand, then I am limited Shiva. Then also I'm Shiva, but I'm limited Shiva. So this is how I feel. I've explained my you know, your questions to myself in this manner, but I'm sure you will answer your question in your own manner.
So do different people have different levels of limitations?
Absolutely.
And
Certainly.
what would be the reason behind it?
Exactly what I said. According to your receptacle, you can contain. If your container has less receptacle, you know, if this glass can hold only this much, so then it doesn't know it, like it's because of our limited receptivity, and we can expand our consciousness by different means. So our receptivity becomes, the word tantra itself means actually the expansion.
So
The
we'll jump on
tantra,
to Tantra in just a second. But before that, I just wanted to ask a further question on this. So the capacity for reception,
that is called grahayakta, like, you know, yeah, anyway.
is there a reason why it would be different for different people?
Because the wailing is different now on everybody. So the more you recognize I am like this, I recognize myself only with I identify myself only with the body. So I'll be engaging only in the sensual gratification, because body, after the sharir is the indriya, the body, then the indriyas, then the mind, then the intellect, then the ego, then the atma, the self, the consciousness. So this is the hierarchy even within this small system, in this microcosm. So everybody has, according to their identification, and that identification is what I called receptivity. Because if everybody identifies according to their receptivity with, either with the body, or some people live too much in the intellect, or some people live in the atma itself, these saints and sages, they don't identify with the pains and pleasures of the body.
And is that somewhere related to karmas, or how is this that justified why different people have different capacity or receptivity?
There is a karma theory, but I would not like to go into that,
Okay.
because then it will be need too much explanation, because karmas in karma theory, okay, let me say it in two sentences if possible. Karma theory, we conceive it as like coming from the previous janmas and janma after janma. But here, we believe that you can burn your karma with your instant recognition also. If you have the grace, or you have the suddenly, the paradigm can shift suddenly. Paradigm can shift by the gaze from the guru. One gaze from the guru, and your paradigm shifts completely. All your karmas are burnt. In any case, diksha is supposed to burn your karmas. By the way, you asked me about difference between that Shaivism and this. You were asking me when you were asking me about how it is different. So this is basically dikshita sampradaya. Like, there is Puranic Shaivism and initiatory Shaivism. So Tantric Shaivism is basically dependent on initiation. So Diksha is the foremost requisite for this tradition.
So let's. I think this is a good point to move into tantra, as you were saying. First, the definition. How do you define tantra, and how does it fit into this paradigm?
Yeah, the definition is, the word tantra comes from tanu vistare, the Sanskrit verb root tanu vistare. Vistare means expansion, so that literally means that which expands. So tanoti trayate cha iti tantra, that which expands, and trayate, liberate, that which expands and liberates is tantra. Okay, so literally tantra is the, I would say, the tools, the means, the methods, the ideas, the concepts which can expand your consciousness and liberate it from your bondage. This is how tantra can be defined. But tantras are a line of scriptures coming to us from ancient times, and they were supposed to be the revealed scriptures. They were orally transmitted from generation to generation within the cohorts of the guru disciple, master disciple, within the lineages. And that's how we could get them. And until, then from 9th century onwards, they were then worked upon and consolidated further. Philosophies evolved out of those ancient scriptures, which are quite proliferating material, like very esoteric, at the same time very profound, and um, scattered also, which was consolidated by Acharya Abhinav Gupta in the late 10th and early 11th century into Tantra Lok. That is, the magnum opus. So you get the essence of the previously existing tantras in this, this voluminous work of Acharya Abhinav Gupta, Tantra Lok.
So, what are the tools you mentioned? Right, this is something like tools to expand your consciousness. What are the tools and slash practices in the Trika philosophy?
So they say, like I mentioned, basically it's an initiatory, tradition. So you have to be a dikshita to understand the tools, and only guru will be able to give you the right tools according to your vantage point. But this is a very inclusive philosophy. There is a saying that you can be initiated gurutaha, shastrataha, swataha. Like you can be initiated by the guru, by the scripture, study of the scripture, and sometimes on your own. Like, a face of a beautiful young lady can just transform your into wonder of the supreme consciousness that creates that beauty, for instance. But your question is, what are these tools? Where does one find them? If you can study shastras, and the tools relate to different levels. So tools would be like Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, for example, gives 112 techniques of experiencing that supreme consciousness. So that you can, using those techniques, you can experience that plenitude of that consciousness. And these techniques range from being as simple as just observing your breath to as complex as visualizing, yourself as a shunya, complete shunya, as if within the walls of this body there is nothing, complete darkness. Or you visualize it the opposite, like complete light. So there, now these 112 techniques, let's take that for example, are divided later by our Guruji also, Swami Lakshmanju Maharaj, into the, what I said, the means are, in the Trika are divided into four means, like, Upaya Chatushtaya, like Shaktopaya, Anavopaya, and Shambhavopaya. And the fourth is almost a no upaya, it is called Anupaya. No means method, because you're already that, you don't need any means. So the three upayas, so whatever level you are, if you are level of at the level of the body, then you will use Anavopaya, which means, like, you would use asana, you would use your breath, the pranayam, and so on. If you are at the level a little bit, like, these are hierarchical, the Anavopaya would lead to Shakto, and Shaktopaya would lead to Shambhavo. But there is directly, if you're directly at the level of, say mind, above body, then you will use Shaktopaya, which uses mantra. The most significant medium in the Shaktopaya is the mantra. The mind itself should become the mantra in this. And then if you are higher than your mind, you're capable of using your awareness, and by the sheer orientation of your will, you can shift the paradigm from your mind to your awareness. Then you are in the Shambhavopaya state. So you feel that quickly, and if you are much higher than your Shiva himself, you don't need any upaya. So yeah, these are the four, you should say three upayas. Fourth is no upaya.
And these include both internal as well as external practices, rituals.
So that, as I explained, like, the Anavopaya is much more gross, like uses the body, and then Shaktopaya becomes more internal, uses the mantra, mind, and Shambhavopaya is totally like uses the awareness. Just if I say visualize light, it becomes light quickly.
So, again, I mean, this question is common to across all traditions. Sitting in meditation, right, in your preferred pose, you can reach whatever kind of at least some level of different state of consciousness, and you might find certain identification with wherever you want to reach. But then comes the real world. How does the integration happen between the real world and this side of spiritual roadmap?
Such a relevant question, Deepak. See, and this is the struggle for the seekers, because when they go inside, sit in meditation, they touch that light, and then they have to also, and they need to come out also, because no one can be completely internalized for until death. The life has to be lived. So what would happen, in according to Trika, and those who follow, they will experience this also. What happens that you bring that light out in the outside world also. So you, here the idea is, they say that, in the crowd of your thoughts, this, take up one singular thought that I am Shiva, Shivoham, and this entire world is my Aishwarya. Sarvo ayam mama vibhavam. All this is my Aishwarya. So that if you have intellectually understood this, that everything is Shiva, everything is part of that unified consciousness, and all of us are connected with by that thread, by the thread of that consciousness, then there will be no other. Your attitude to the world will be completely different, because the filter of the I-ness, small I-ness, will drop, and the bigger I-ness will unfold. Like, you will feel one with Alka Tyagi, you will feel one with the maid servant, you will feel one with the butterfly, you will feel one with the. This is not a theoretical expression, because if you have really touched the light within in your meditation and continuous practice, then that spillover is seen in the in your manifest world. So sometimes we are able to hold only, say, 1 hour, we are able to be happy, and then it. So that means our practice has to be stronger, more intense. We have to kind of work on ourselves intellectually, spiritually, from all levels, mentally.
I was talking to somebody today and this question came up, so I'm throwing it back to you. So, the feeling of oneness to spill over, and in fact, all the allied good qualities of compassion, kindness, uh, I don't think that is the problem, right? Because anybody who is serious about their practice, usually these spill over.
Absolutely, I agree.
The problem which this other person was facing was from the other side. Again, there is no other, but let's keep that aside.
Let's keep that.
Right? The other side, which in professional life is too real to be ignored, right? And there are plenty of such professions where, right, somebody will take advantage of you, suppliers will give you wrong, all that stuff is there.
Yes.
And it eventually, at least to my understanding, it becomes a choice whether you want to succeed in that profession or whether you want to change your lifestyle completely. Because I think it cannot be ignored that there are definitely situations, circumstances where thinking you are one with the other person won't result into a conducive outcome. How has your own experience been in this regard? I mean, since you have been practicing for decades now.
What you're saying is very real for everybody. As long as we are in the body, the sensations are there. I feel pain for the same reasons that you just mentioned. But what happens then? You are quickly able to become a sakshi. You're able to see that, this will in any case is a passing phenomena, because time is passing. So what is my state of mind, or that other person's state of mind today will not be the state of mind tomorrow, for example. So the spillover and the feeling of identity, and the sadhaka exudes certainly positive vibrations, and around the sadhaka, the supposedly, people who can perceive, they'll be kind, but there are people who are living completely like blockheads. They will be like throwing stones, like they are stones, and they will behave like stones, so you will get hurt. So that hurt will be there, but the only thing is how quickly you are able to, with your own strength, you are able to. For me, what work is, because every day, in the morning I sit, in the evening I sit. So in the morning again I clean my slate, and at night again I clean my slate, so my slate is completely new the next day. So
And,
seriously, I don't feel any and you can't afford to feel the grudge, because grudges are not in your own head.
and do you also clean your slate of these people who are blockheaded?
It's a good question, because you have to earn money in order to sustain yourself. So you you imagine, alas, I could live in a community, like my friends say, come to Bali, and it's a spiritual community, and like you yourself are trying to balance, within this big work that you do, and then holding on to your spiritual journey, and that the intensity with which you feel this passion to understand things. So there are kind of lollipops that appear, but I think finally the answer is to increase your own inner strength, and things certainly shed off and clear up. Certainly will shed off and clear up. The people will not hold against you. Fine. I do have that faith. So if we kind of, sustain in our positivity, in our light, then the darkness will certainly, like, today's Bijoya the Kashmir.
Mm.
So Ravan has to fall finally. That's what I believe. So tell your friend not to, rather, strengthen
No,
himself.
they chose a path, the path of cleaning up blockheaded people. That was
तो
already
ठीक है,
chosen.
राम की तरह रावण को मारना भी पड़ता है. So here it's a play, there is what is amazing in Trika, that there is no supposedly, the moral choices, because nothing is sacred, nothing is profane. Like if a mother and the child has stolen something, a mother has to give a tight slap, and a Ram has to pull his arrow. So
Mm.
whatever works to hold the situation, the harmony in the situation for your own, you have to apply that, because lok vyavhar.
Look, I mean, again, it's a slightly unrelated question, but I would love to know your own experience in this. When somebody comes to you who has experienced a deep tragedy, right? And tragedies are all around us. What usually is your response to them? Is because again there are various responses, and people who are like somebody like you who has been a sadhak for quite some time. How do you take it in the manner of your spiritual understanding, or is that usually not the time to bring it in?
Not at all. Words
Mm.
cannot, appease the suffering of the other when it's totally intense.
Mm.
Now when we are talking theoretically, we can talk, but you rather embrace that person, sit with them as often as you can. Love is the only answer,
Mm.
and no words. So I would rather embrace, go to them again and again. If they are not coming to me, I will seek them and hold them, literally literally in embrace. So if somebody is coming to
Makes
you,
sense.
you
Yes.
hold them in embrace. That's all, silently. Words cannot.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Alkaji, it's been a wonderful session, but as we end it, what if somebody wanted to learn more about Trika philosophy?
I would say, like, look for the guru, but as we said, guru taha shastrataha swataha. So start, at least, right away, start studying the shastras. Like, begin with Vijnana Bhairav Tantra, or begin with more simpler texts like Pratibhigya Hridayam, Pakshim Raja, or Shiva Sutras, although it's complex, but thankfully, the new editions, which by, for example, by Jay Deva Singh,
Mm.
by then Doctrine of Vibration by Mark Dixkowski G. These are, in a way, these are not very complex texts. So study the Shastras. When you feel more prepared, then go to a teacher, and the teacher will certainly, unfold. And yeah,
Is there any academy or school which you think you can recommend?
school or academy will not give the spiritual
Okay,
teachings. So, in order to learn the practice, then guru is needed. Then
perfect.
you have to go to the guru.
Again, thank you so much. I think we covered as much as we could in a short session. But thank you so much for taking the time, Alkaji.
Such a pleasure, Deepak. You are like the same soul, Shiva soul.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.